Of mine. Welcome to a really fun lecture. Now we start to get to some good news. We've had enough bad news, haven't we? Yes. Anyway, second wave feminism, its roots, ideology, and organization. We won't be doing the storybook activity, sadly. That's something we did in class, but I found a really cool documentary for you to watch. Indeed, I'm recording this on Easter Sunday, and I laid in bed and watched it and thought, I feel so strong and empowered, and then I went out and had a really long walk. So it's a good documentary. Anyway, next slide. So background stuff. We didn't really specifically do a lecture on the Seneca Falls Convention, but you did do a reading on it the week that we had the True Womanhood lecture. So the first, we consider feminism to have three waves. The first wave, the second wave, and the third wave. The second wave is the topic of our lecture tonight. The third wave is the topic of our lecture next week. The first wave, we've just kind of, we've snuck around its edges. That is, you read about the Seneca Falls Convention, which is considered the beginning of the first wave, and then you watched a film that was about working for the passage of the 19th Amendment when you watched Iron-Jawed Angels. So that's the first wave of feminism. It is a massive and concerted effort to get women the right to vote and a number of other things. It's particularly interested in divorce rights, that is, a woman's right to divorce, because remember, in a world governed by coverture, women did not have a right to instigate a divorce. The first wave feminism, that is, that sort of 1800s feminism, was also very interested in what they called married woman's property rights. That is a notion that a married woman could retain property she had inherited or had, and that she had a right to property even though she was married, etc., etc. And of course, suffrage, which is a fancy word for the right to vote. And you recognize that's a picture of the lady standing in front of the White House. And if you saw Iron-Jawed Angels, then you recognize that and remember that. All right? Next slide. Second wave feminism is in many ways very much like first wave feminism in that it's working on a lot of the same stuff, which tells you something. When you have to have another movement to work on the same stuff, that tells you that the first movement, well, it made quite a bit of headway, because the 19th Amendment, which grants women the right to vote, is not a small thing. But nonetheless, primarily the first wave and the second wave were both really interested in changing laws. And then what we'll talk about next week is the third wave, which is kind of where we are now, which is, okay, we've got the laws. Now how do we get them enforced? How do we change how people think about stuff? Like, it's all very well and nice if there's a law that says rape's illegal, but if no one's going to enforce it, no one's going to prosecute the men that do it, and if we live in a culture that still doesn't think it's actually a crime, then it doesn't matter if there's a law, right? So that's third wave stuff. We got the laws. Now, how do we change people's hearts and minds? Second wave stuff is we need the laws. So while the first wave's big goal was to pass an amendment to get women the right to vote, the second wave's big task, which they failed at, and it's an ongoing failure, was to pass an equal rights amendment. That is, an amendment to the United States of the Constitution that would make it illegal to discriminate against someone based on their sex or gender. Second wave feminism is also super interested in issues of sexuality and reproductive rights. I've spelled reproductive wrong there. Reversed a couple of letters. Maybe I'll remember to go back and fix that. We'll see. Which they succeeded with in part with the passage of Roe v. Wade in 1973, which legalized with limits a woman's right to abortion. But if you're paying attention in America right now, you know that right, and it's an important right, and I have lectured about this before, and I take this really seriously. It's an extremely important right. Women cannot be free and equal if we cannot control our bodies. That right to control our bodies is under attack in America as we speak. So that's unfortunate. And of course, ongoing issues about women in the domestic sphere. Particularly violence against women in the domestic sphere and violence against women in the public sphere. Yes. next slide. It says here, what's the start date for the second wave? And I got to tell you, I don't really care what the start date is, but I think in exploring the different moments in which that might be considered the start date, we can talk about a lot of stuff. And what really happens is, it's really hard to put a date on movements because movements are about a popular groundswell. So where's the moment where there's enough sort of people out there in the country for a thing to change from some people care about it to enough people care about it that it's a movement. So let's just what we'll do here in the next few slides is explore a few landmarks, a few things that you could point to and say that might be the start. Sometimes, and not very often, but sometimes textbooks will say that you can pin the start date of the second wave to President Kennedy's report on the status of women, which found, shockingly, I can't believe we had ever report on this, that there was discrimination and inequality in America. Really? And that I'm making fun of it, and well, I should, because it's stupid. But on the other hand, what the president's report did in 1961 was create an official federal government document that said women are oppressed in America, and that's a problem. So a sort of federal government nationwide presidential report recognizing the problem might be a place to start. Another place to start might be in the 1962 introduction of the pill. It was approved by the FDA and hit doctors' shelves, as it were, in 1962, the year I was born. Oh, wow, that was a long time ago. Anyway, if you're thinking, what does the pill have to do with anything? It's almost impossible to overestimate the importance of this. You and I live in a world where there are a number of ways in which a woman can, with relative security, limit her fertility. That is, there's a number of things you can do to and with your female body to prevent pregnancy until that moment when you decide, when you choose to become a mother. And until women can control their fertility, they can't control much else about your lives. You can't control your success in college. You can't control your success in the workplace. You can't control your right to be an Antarctic explorer. Whatever the thing is, if you can't control your fertility, because babies, they're cute, but they screw shit up. They slow women down, and they trap us at home. And that's cool for the moment when you choose that. But if you don't choose it, it can be a problem, right? So in 1962, for the very first time in world history ever, women in the world, and mostly women in America, because this isn't the sort of thing that was available in developing nations, and in many developing nations still isn't available to women, but nonetheless, for the first time in world history, some women in the world could limit their fertility, could control their fertility by the simple use of a pill. And when you can do that, that changes everything. Yeah. Okay, next slide. And we might also date the beginning of the second wave feminism to the 1963 publication of Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique. There are a few books in 20th century American history that create kind of before and after moments for America. And I would argue the two, and I'm not just me, lots of people would argue, and I think this is cool, that the two most influential books of the post-World War II America, so 1945 to 2000, the two most important books are Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique and Rachel Carson's Silent Spring in 1968. Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, in many ways we can credit for kicking off the second wave feminist movement, and Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, which is a book about the dangers of chemical pesticides, in many ways kicked off the environmental movement. And those are both books written by women in a world that said women don't do important things. So, see, when you can control your destiny, you can write books that will change the world. That's cool, huh? Anyway, what's the deal with the feminine mystique? In 1957-58, Betty Friedan, she was going back to college. She was going back for her 10th year reunion, and she had graduated in social work, and she had struggled finding a job and struggled finding sort of meaningful work as a woman. And she was wondering, she'd graduated from Smith College, a very fancy all-women's college, kind of an Ivy League school, and she wondered if the other women that she graduated with had had similar troubles. That is, they'd gone to college and had all these high-flown plans and then gone out in the real world and had a little trouble implementing them because they were women. And when she surveyed her college graduates, she started with just the women that she graduated with, and then she, as the work became obviously meaningful, she branched out and started surveying other college graduates, female college graduates, and she found out that almost all of these women had ended up, in spite of their college degrees, being full-time housewives and mothers. And I'm not, again, not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I think it's not okay if it's a world where that's your only choice, because then it's not, then it's compulsory, and then it's not about freedom and liberty. It's about being compelled to do a thing because of your biology. So anyway, and then a number of these women, they had gone to college, they'd been well educated, they'd had all these dreams, and then they ended up being well educated housewives and mothers, and that they didn't find that to be all that pleasant or fulfilling. And that what Betty Friedan discovered when she talked to these women with this survey, she didn't sit down and talk one-on-one with hundreds of women. She coined this thing, this fact that these women theoretically had everything that society said they were supposed to have: husbands, children, houses in the suburbs, economic security with middle-class husbands. That nonetheless these women were unhappy. And so she coined this, as you see there in that third bullet point, the problem that has no name. That is, that all over America, women were told that they were supposed to be happy and fulfilled, staying home and being mothers, and they weren't. And if this sounds familiar, if it sounds a little bit like our True Womanhood lecture from the 1900s, there's a reason for that. That is, we'll get to it in the next slide, but really what we have after World War II, if World War II is this moment of relative liberty and equality for women, a moment where America recognizes the power and importance of women's labor, what happens after the war is the country gets really conservative, and it gets really nervous about all these messages to women, and sort of stands all those messages on their heads and says to women, yeah, we were wrong. We changed our mind. You should go home, ladies. Yeah, thanks. No, vacuum, would you? So, well, that would make me unhappy too. Anyway, so Betty Friedan's book essentially contended that nuclear families and 20th century life was oppressive to women, and that it turned women from human beings into domestic slaves. And there's something to that, because if a slave is a person who works because they have to, because they have no choice, then that's a housewife in a world that says you're not allowed to do anything else. Right? Right. Next slide. Mystique was tapping into was this backlash against women that I was just talking about. That is, that after World War II, American culture got really conservative, and that many of the ideological gains for women in World War II, this notion again that women's work was valuable, that strong women were powerful and sexy, etc., these women were told to go home and be housewives. And again, like the True Woman stuff in the 1800s, told not only should you be a housewife, but you want to be a housewife. And that is being a housewife that you will find your happiness. And if you do not find your happiness, it's because there's something wrong with you as a woman. Now, again, if we remember the difference between prescriptive behavior and real behavior, we should keep in mind, and I think I've said this before, and I'll say it now, and I'll probably say it again, in every decade in American history, some women have worked for wages. And in every decade in American history, more women left the home and worked for wages than the decade before. And that's even true for the 50s. So while there's immensely time of public conservatism and telling women, you're bad, you should go home, you should be housewives, still, more women were working for wages in the 50s than were in the 40s. And remember, the 40s was a time of a big jump in numbers of waged women, right? Remember that from last week? So what you've got is you've got this tension between reality. Women are continuing to go out and work in the workforce, not at any of the really high-paying, high prestige jobs, but nonetheless working for wages in what we call pink-collar work, right? Waitressing, school teaching, secretarying, that kind of thing. Not there's anything wrong with those things either, again, if that's your choice. So women are still doing that, but the culture is gone back to a sort of a pre-Civil War domesticity, cult of true womanhood thing. Hey, you want to see something fun? Let's go look at the next slide. Brace yourself. This is going to be horrifying. 1955 Housekeeping Monthly magazine. It's moderately famous. It shows up all over the place. It's the Good Wife's Guide. Let's just take a look at some of these. Have dinner ready. Things a good wife should do. That is a notion that when he comes home, he has a right to have a good, well-cooked meal. You should pretty yourself up before he comes home, because, you know, he deserves to have a good-looking wife who's also made him dinner. Look at her there in her heels and her perfect hair. You should be a little gay, so I guess your husband should have a lesbian for wife. No, I think they mean gay by happy. That is, when he comes home, you should be happy to see him, and I don't care how your day went, bitch. Smile. You should also clear away the clutter. So you got to make him dinner, and you got to clean the house, but you should also be happy. You should gather up the school books and toys and put all that stuff away. Again, hurry, hurry. He's coming home. Clean up. In the cooler months, maybe you could light him a fire. You know, get him his slippers. Get ready to give him a blowjob. I don't think it says that. I think I added that myself. Sorry. Oh, also, while you're at it, in your spare time, you clean up the children, you know, wipe their faces, brush their hair, so that they're nice when Dad comes home. He shouldn't have to see them looking like children. Gross. Be happy to see him. I like that they have to tell you to be happy to see him. Well, that suggests something in and of itself, doesn't it? You should greet him with a warm smile. Oh, baby, so nice to hear you. And you should listen to him. I love that it says here, you have done a dozen important things to tell him, but let him talk first. Remember, his topics of conversation are always more important than yours. What? What the fuck, bitch? But what we have here is a notion that men out there in the public sphere doing important things, while women are at home in the domestic sphere doing, you know, stupid but necessary domestic work. Make the evening all about him. Don't complain. If he's grumpy and he's a bear, just be nice. Your goal is to try and make your house a place of order and peace and tranquility for your husband. Don't greet him with complaints or problems. This is another good one. Don't complain if he's late home for dinner or stays out all night. Count this as minor as to what he might have gone through the day. So your husband's out all night because he's, you know, banging the neighbor? Well, don't bitch about that, girl. Just clean up the house. Maybe if you'd have been a good housewife to start with, he'd have come home. Make him comfortable. You know, here, lean him back in his chair. We're back to the blowjobs, I think. Arrange his pillow. Fluff his... What? Fluff him? No. Offer to take off his shoes. Speak in I like this. Like he's a dog with rabies. Speak in a low, soothing, and pleasant voice. Don't ask him questions. Question his actions, judgment, and integrity. Remember, he is the master of the house. There's the slave language, right? And as such, he will exercise his will with fairness and truthfulness. You have no right to question him. And the last and most important thing, and ladies, we could put this on a t-shirt, a good wife always knows her place. Yeah. Oh, man, doesn't that make you want to go out and with a sign and demonstrate on the street? I know it does me. Anyway, yeah, you're welcome, babes, chicks, dudes, all of you. Next slide. It's the effects of the feminine mystique. The Feminine Mystique, for a while, was the best-selling book in America. It outsold that other perennial favorite, the Bible. It sold 3 million copies between 1962 and 2000. It's often cited as the most influential book of the 20th century, though I will say oftentimes Rachel Carson's book is also cited as the most influential book. women politicians, kind of everybody was forced to admit by the fact that for a while everybody was buying this book and talking about it, that that there was a problem, that it should have a name, and that we should maybe do stuff about it. Now, here I don't want to get too celebratory about this, me, middle-class white girl, because the flaw of the feminine mystique is it was focusing on the issues of middle-class white women. That is, these poor ladies who had college educations, who were then sent home to be stay-at-home wives and to be, to be full-time wives and mothers. This is not a problem poor women, working-class women, immigrant women had or have. Oh no, isn't this sad that I didn't get to use my college education? So this is very much, the feminine mystique is very much about the problems of the elite class women and middle class women. It's not about poor women. It's not about women of color. It's not about immigrant women. And so what it does, the feminine mystique, and I don't think you can blame this on Betty Friedan. Well, I don't know. Blame is probably just the wrong word. But it does frame the second wave feminist movement as fundamentally a movement by and for white middle class women. And there's been a lot of complaints in sort of histories of women of the women's movement about this. But the reality is movements are almost always started by groups that, not always, but often started by groups that have the leisure time to have a movement. There's a reason that students start a lot of movements, because young people, and I know you're busy, I get that, but you're going to get busier, and you're going to get busier, and you're going to get busier. So stay-at-home middle-class housewives maybe had both the education and the resources and the time to start a movement, and working-class women who had to work 40, 50, 60 hours a week and come home and do all this shit probably didn't have the energy or time. So, but nonetheless, we should acknowledge that the movement began as fundamentally a white and middle and upper middle class movement. Yeah? Okay. We might also, look, there's Gloria Steinem, both dressed in her Playboy bunny outfit and dressed as a real human being, as a woman who was a journalist. In 1963, Gloria Steinem, who had gone to another one of those fancy East Coast Ivy League all-women's colleges, and she was having trouble getting journalism work, she went undercover in a Playboy club as a bunny, and then she wrote this two-part expose for Vanity Fair that was just scathing. Playboy clubs don't exist anymore, and praise the goddess for that. But they used to be places, they weren't strip clubs, they were like gentlemen's clubs where you could go, to get away from the bitches, and smoke cigars and drink amber liquid, and be waited on by these scantily clad bunnies with the ears and the corset and the fishnet stockings and the high heels. And it was considered this it's hard to believe because it just seems so obviously repulsive now. But in the late 50s and early 60s, it was all considered very glamorous and like the glamorous and thrilling life to be a bunny. And so Gloria Steinem went undercover to work as a bunny, and she found out, not surprising to any of us in 2020, that there was nothing glamorous about this crazy shit. Anyway, you want to go see? Next slide. Expose was a critique of what she called Playboy culture or bunny culture, that is, and that bunnies, rather than being glamorous and powerful women, bunnies were abused workers. They were overworked, they were underwaged, they worked under awful conditions, and they worked in uncomfortable clothing. And her expose is really, really specific about how uncomfortable that corsety, swimsuity, strapless thing was, and then spend your day waiting tables in high heels, and that how you couldn't bend over because the corset was boned, and then the way that men felt free to touch you in all the places that men do when not appropriately. No, I don't mean all of you, and I'm not pointing any fingers, but we do know that some men continue to behave this way, etc., etc. The sexual harassment on this job was endemic. The men, because it's not just touching. men say stuff. And many men take up some pleasure in saying derogatory things to women, both to enhance their personal power and to diminish the woman. And so that this harassment, because anytime things of a sexual manner are said to you at work, that's sexual harassment, right? Right. Okay. So the Playboy bunny, she said, is a symbol of the cultural chauvinism, which is a word we used to use for oppression, patriarchal oppression. And we don't really use the word chauvinism much anymore. It is, bunnies were the symbol of patriarchal control of women, of sexism, of all that gross and repulsive stuff. The expose made Steinem, really Steinem and Friedan, both leaders of the movement. Friedan was older and a sturdy-looking woman, and Gloria was this young, attractive, kind of the Beyonce of the movement, as it were, right? Sort of sexy and exciting and thrilling. Anyway, so, yeah, next slide. All right, so the movement is a movement of multiple faces. And as you might guess, because women is a big group. There's a lot of us, and we're not all the same. The biggest section of second wave feminists are what we call the moderate feminists. And I like to make sure we're super clear about this, because I think there's a really sexist and oppressive part of our culture that imagines that being a sexist, being a feminist, is in and of itself radical. Oh, you radical feminist. As if radical and feminist meant the same thing. And it's not at all true. The super key to this, it says here in the second bullet point, a moderate in anybody, I don't care what moderate, whatever the movement is, a moderate is someone who seeks from within the system to fix the system, to make the system work better for the group that's having trouble. So a moderate works within the system to fix it. And that's it. Most of second wave feminism are the moderates. I mean, the very notion that you would change the laws is to essentially fundamentally agree that capitalism and American representative democracy is fine. We just need to fix it so it works better for women. So that's not radical. That's moderate. So the most powerful, the largest moderate feminist organization in the world, and the oldest existing feminist organization in the world, is the National Organization of Women, which is established in 1966, co-founded by Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem. And it was founded to enforce Title VII of the Equal Rights Act of 1964, which made discrimination based on sex in public facilities illegal. Now, that's a lot to take in there. But essentially, there was a number of civil rights acts in in the 1960s, and the 1964 Equal Rights Act, what it did was it outlawed segregation. So that's a big deal. It comes on the heels of Brown v. Board of Education in the 1950s, but it essentially said we can't have segregation in public places, that is, places funded by public monies, libraries, government buildings, schools, etc., etc. Can't do that anymore. And somebody figured out to tack on this Title VII, so Section 7 of that Equal Rights Law Act, which said not only can we not discriminate against people in public based on their race, but we also shouldn't do it based on their sex. So that's fine. That's cool, but like I said, it's all very well and nice to pass a law. Now you have to enforce it. So the National Organization of Women was born to force America to recognize that law as something helpful and not helpful, something right and legal. Right, next slide. So now, these days, a national organization is the largest organization in the world. I totally urge you to do this, just for the fun of it. Stop this slide, as soon as I get done with this, stop this slideshow for just a second. go to the National Organization of Women's website and just take a look at all the things they work on. They work on everything. They're issues of sexuality, issues for working class women, unionized issues, the sex trade, third world issues. They work on everything. They're huge. They're well funded. You don't hear about them much, but they put a fair bit of money in the pockets of politicians who aren't sexist assholes, and those people are mostly Democrats. Oh God, let's be honest, they're all Democrats, etc., etc., etc. So do that if you want, or you can put it on your note list to do later. It really would be. I'm not telling you to join. I'm not telling you that at all. I'm a member, but you do whatever you want to do. I don't care. I just think it'd be helpful to get a sense of, instead of me telling you, just to examine that yourself. Anyway, when you get back here, I got another job for you. So next slide. During class, I would load this video, and then we would watch Helen Reddy sing "I Am Woman," and you don't want me to sing "I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar," and numbers too big to ignore. No, see, no, Peg, don't sing. But I can't make you, but just for fun, copy and paste that YouTube video and go see it. This song was huge. What I tell you, I'm really bad at popular culture, but whatever the really big songs that the powerful women singers are singing these days, however big those are, "I Am Woman" was as big or bigger. It was a top 40 hit. It was a feminist song. You heard it everywhere. People still, older ladies my age, still reference it, etc., etc. I also like this video. There's Helen Reddy. She's a very attractive woman, but she's also modeling a kind of a new kind of attractive femininity with that kind of a modified hippie thing there. Anyway, go watch Helen Reddy sing that song. All right? Okay, and then you can come back and talk to me about the next things. Yeah? Okay. Okay, I'll see ya in the next slide. Go look at that video. Don't just ignore me and rush through this. These times are tough. Treat yourself to a video of a lady singing a song that says, "Bite me, bitches." Okay, see you next slide. All right, did you like the video? Did you go see it? I hope you did. So we're coming up on the end of part one, so the successes of the moderate feminist movement are myriad, and it's mostly about laws. That is, the moderate feminist movement, the feminist movement, which was mostly the moderate feminists, fundamentally were all about laws. So with Title VII, which made it illegal to discriminate against people based on sex in a public place. Title IX, which outlawed sexual discrimination in education. And we hear a lot about Title IX these days because colleges all figured out that college was not a safe place for girls and some guys, but mostly women, and that colleges got really proactive about trying to keep women safe from sexual harassment and sexual discrimination while on campus. But Title IX is also the thing that brought you all the women's sports. That is, in outlawing sexual discrimination in education, one of the things it did is said that whatever money you spend on boys' sports, men's sports, you had to spend on women's sports. And I tell you, this still makes college football people crazy because they're perfectly comfortable with colleges spending all their money on the football program. But this is where you get sort of all the women's soccer and women's softball, women's tennis, all those things. Because usually for most colleges, the thing not Cal Poly, certainly over the hill, because Cal Poly doesn't have a football program. But for most colleges, the thing they spend the most money on is the football program. Of course, there is no female version of that, so you then have to spend the equivalent amount of money on some other sport that women play. So you get a lot of, and what's cool about that is that all those women's sports means that athletic women get college scholarships, and that's cool too. The Women's Education Equity Act of 1972, which essentially reinforced Title IX, said you've got to have equity, equality in education. Roe v. Wade, which is the U.S. Supreme Court guide that said that abortion was illegal without limits up to a woman's being pregnant, 3 months pregnant, with some limits, 3 to 6 months, and only if the mother's life was in danger after 6 months. Roe v. Wade's tremendously important, and I know there are people listening to this who are like, well, I don't believe in abortion, and I think it's wrong. Well, fine then, cool. Don't get an abortion. But what you shouldn't do is tell other women they can't. In a perfect world, I'm going to be super honest with you, in a perfect world, we all wish there were no abortions. But in a perfect world, no woman ever gets pregnant until she wants to. But we don't live in that world. Female body is a tricky thing. And sometimes it does stuff that you have no control over. Every woman listening to me knows that. We have virtually no control over our bodies sometimes. And that's probably true of men too, but I don't have a male body, so I know less about that. If you cannot control your fertility, you are not free. You are not free as an individual, and your group isn't free. And that's more important than any moral objection you may or may not have to this nonsense. Also, let's be super clear. If men could get pregnant, we wouldn't be talking about this shit in the public forum anymore. That I would argue that most of what this anti-abortion talk is really is about a cultural conservative need to control women by controlling their bodies, by controlling their fertility. And do you want to stand on that side of that thing? I should think you would not. Okay. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act, which is it's totally unsexy, but immensely important. Before this act is passed in 1974, it was completely acceptable for banks, car places, mortgage places to deny women loans or credit just because they were women. And the Equal Credit Opportunity Act said you can't do that. You just can't. Women, I always go out and buy my own cars, and my family, the women in my family think that's really weird because my mother's 70-some years old and has never bought a car on her own. My husband, my dad just brings them home. Here's the car. That makes me nervous. But that's her gig. That's her choice. Good for her. But we live in a world where she can choose to stay at home and while Dad buys the car and brings it home, in spite of the fact that she makes more than him, or she did before she retired. And I live in a world where I am allowed to go out and get my own damn car without my husband's supervision. Yay to everybody having their choice. The Pregnancy Discrimination Act in 1978 said it was illegal to discriminate against women because they were pregnant. Now, I suspect that that's probably still... This is a law that's hard to enforce. I would imagine if you were 6 months pregnant and carrying a belly in front of you and you went out applying for jobs that people wouldn't hire you. But the reality is they can do that as long as they don't say, I didn't hire you because you were pregnant. So they'd have to come up with some other excuse. But it did say that in theory that was illegal. You also couldn't fire women just because they were pregnant, etc., etc. And then marital rape laws. Oh my God. And notice the big range here. These things went state to state. So marital rape laws that were this notion that in most states before the 1970s, a husband legally couldn't rape his wife. Because coverture says that husbands own their wives, you can't rape someone you own, right? Because she can't say no to you because she's your property. So there's this big push by the feminist movement to say that's ridiculous. Rape is rape. I don't care if he's your husband or not. Indeed, it's actually maybe worse when your husband does it because there's a violation of not only all the sexual rape stuff. This is icky. But there's also that violation of trust. This person was supposed to love you. So state by state, states passed laws that said, yeah, you can't. Hold on, my mother-in-law's yelling at me. I'll come back to this. Hold on. All right, I'm sorry, I'm back. I'm taking care of my mother-in-law during COVID, and sometimes she hollers for me to tell me, nothing very important, but that's okay too. Anyway, okay, I think we covered all those. Next slide. Importantly, because the laws are good, laws are nice, but what most important for our purposes about all these laws is they suggest changing social attitudes towards women and girls. That is what we begin to get here in the 60s and 70s, is we begin to get a whole lot of men and women working on creating a world that we now benefit from. Because we live in a place that is still really, really imperfect with regards to gender. We still are nowhere near having a female president, and lots of other developed nations have had female leaders. So we're behind because America is a weirdly conservative and frighteningly sexist place for all the finger pointing we do at other countries. But nonetheless, what we have here gradually throughout the 20th century is changing attitudes towards women and girls about equality. And changing attitudes gradually, again, nowhere near there yet, about violence against women. We still live in a country that's not sure. We're pretty sure that Brett Kavanaugh raped Christine Blasey Ford, and yet nonetheless, Kavanaugh was confirmed by Republican senators and put on the United States Supreme Court. So we live in a world where I think rape is illegal and we theoretically disapprove of it, but lots of men still get away with it. But, you know, at least we're clear that it's bad. We have changing attitudes about women, and I think men's sexuality, issues of sexuality, a notion that there's something wrong or dirty or shameful or against God's will about sexuality. And gender identification stuff's changing too, but I think that's really a third wave thing, so let's not jump ahead. That is, we begin here in the second wave feminism to create a world where today many young women tell me they've never been discriminated against or they've never been victimized by sexual oppression. And sometimes they don't believe it exists. And I know there are men who don't believe it exists, but there's two sides to this. For men, this is, and I know people get scoffy when you say things like male privilege, but male privilege does exist. And one of the privileges of male privilege is the privilege to not believe in male privilege, and the privilege to not believe that it is, the world is different for people who aren't men. Key to male privilege is this notion that the world that men experience is the world everyone experiences. And every single woman listening to this, and many of the men listening to this, can tell you that's not true. So, while many men do not believe in discrimination, that's a product of male privilege. Many women don't either, and in part it's because they either, one, haven't yet experienced it, because if you're a woman who believes you've never experienced oppression, maybe you haven't, but then I would say you're probably young. So just, hold on, it's going to happen. Or, and this is probably more likely, you have, but you just didn't see it. Because I see stuff all the day that I think is fairly offensive and that people don't really notice. And sometimes I point it out and sometimes I don't. God, you don't want to be the angry feminist. But I think also that a lot of sexism and sex discrimination in our culture is invisible because it's normal. So I would argue that probably everyone listening to this lecture has experienced discrimination, and all the women have experienced sex discrimination. And yeah, you know what? I know there's an argument to be made that men experience that too, and I'm not going to buy that argument. And I don't particularly want to have that argument right now. Here's what I think. I think a world that imagines that somehow men are discriminated against is a world that imagines that men should get everything. And that anytime men don't get everything, that's discrimination. And wow, is that male privilege or what? Sometimes you just don't get shit. Suck it up. Some argue that moderate feminists, indeed you hear this from old ladies my age, that are my generation and the generation before me, that ladies who are like in their 70s instead of their 50s, that we were too successful because we created an entire generation of women and men who don't recognize how bad things used to be, or that the world we live in is a product of many, many, many people fighting for many, many decades. And here's the thing, I think that's a stupid thing to whine about. I think the whole point of working to make the world a better place, either about sex discrimination, racial discrimination, sexuality discrimination, religious discrimination, job type discrimination, age discrimination. The whole point of working to stop those things is to create a world where people don't know it ever happened, and that people take for granted the very thing they should take for granted: equality. You should take that for granted. So I'm not one of those feminists who whines around saying, we were too successful and nobody appreciates us. I think that's missing the point. Anyway, I think the next slide is the end of part 1. Let's go see. End of part 1. So that's the end of this first half of the lecture. This went a little long. They seem to get longer and longer. I'm sorry. I'll move through the second one a little faster, as I think I usually do in all of these. Anyway, see you there. Okay, bye.